this photo from Grand Mere State Park. This is from Joshua Nowicki, and what you're seeing here is a mirage.
My last video asked the question, if the curve of the Earth prohibits Joshua Nowicki from seeing Chicago from 55 miles away, and therefore he was seeing a mirage of Chicago on his horizon only a few miles away from him, why would the apparent size of the much closer mirage match the apparent size of the actual Chicago as seen from 55 miles away through a 200mm zoom lens? Obviously it wouldn't. If Nowicki had a direct line of sight to the real coffee cup Chicago here, it would take up less of his field of view and produce a small image on his retinas or the sensor in his camera. On the other hand, if the curve of the Earth prevented him from seeing the actual thing, and he was instead seeing a ghost image mirage of that thing, then due to the fact that light doesn't shrink down in size as it travels, the mirage would be the same size as the real thing, but he'd be seeing it 10 times closer to him. So the mirage coffee cup Chicago would take up more of his field of view and produce a much larger image on his retinas and his camera sensor. Bottom line, you can't very well have the farther and closer coffee cup Chicagos both producing the same size image on your retinas, which means his photo is not of some mirage only 5 miles away from him, but the actual Chicago skyline from 55 miles away. And since that's impossible if we live on a ball, we don't live on a ball. Here's another example. This time it's the Milwaukee skyline from a whopping 85 miles away. Once again, the quote, official sources tell us we're seeing a mirage. This one was taken with a cell phone, and we can guess from the foreground that the observer's eye height was maybe 10 feet above the lake. In the ball Earth model, that puts his horizon at about 4 miles away, and Milwaukee behind almost a mile of Earth curve. So what do you think? Is that a photo of the tiny Milwaukee that would naturally result from seeing it from 85 miles away? Or do you think it's more reasonable that this is a life-size mirage of Milwaukee from only 4 miles away? And it only gets worse when we consider celestial objects. Have you ever heard of a Selenelion eclipse? That's when we can see both the sun and the eclipsed moon above the horizon at the same time. And it's hard for the Earth to be the thing causing the eclipse shadow on the moon when the Earth isn't even between the sun and the moon, right? So how do the people who believe we live on a spinning ball explain this observational evidence? The same way they explain seeing Chicago and Milwaukee from farther away than we would be able to in their model. They claim that the sun and moon we see on the horizon are mirages, just like Chicago and Milwaukee. They say the actual sun and moon are already below your horizon, and you are seeing mirages of them rise and set every day in every weather condition. That way, the Earth can be between the actual sun and moon, causing the eclipse shadow on the moon, while we see a mirage sun and a mirage moon above our horizon. But the little spotlight sun and moon we see in the sky, about the size of a dime, don't actually exist in reality. They exist only in our minds as the result of a direct line of sight to something that is far away. There's not really a tiny dime-sized sun and moon floating around in the sky somewhere beyond our horizon, right? Of course not, because just like with Chicago and Milwaukee, the light from the sun and moon travels as actual size, and it's only our direct line of sight to the source of that light, coupled with how our eyes work, that produces the tiny sun and moon we see in the sky. The minute we lose direct line of sight to the real sun and moon, the tiny sun and moon cease to exist. And since this tiny sun and moon don't actually exist anywhere in nature, how on earth can they be refracting up and around our horizon so that we're able to see mirages of them in the sky? How could we possibly see a mirage of something that doesn't actually exist? It's the same with tiny Chicago and tiny Milwaukee. They only exist as a product of direct line of sight to a faraway object. Take away the direct line of sight from a distance, and the tiny versions of these things simply don't exist. I'd like to look into this a little more, but in order to do that, we need to fix this graphic. While I'm thrilled to see that its maker has the observer's horizon level with his eyes like in real life, instead of having him looking down to his horizon, I'm fairly certain that no human being is 1,000 miles tall like this dude. In fact, if we scaled the planet Earth we've been told we live on down to the size of a basketball, humans would be smaller than the smallest known bacteria, and we'd need an electron microscope to even see them. So much for the demonstrably false horizon dip angle claim, right? Also, the amount that the sun and moon are claimed to refract up at the horizon is 1/2 degree, or 1 of their diameters. This meme shows them refracting up twice that amount, so I'll fix those two things. While it's impossible to show the heliocentric model to scale due to the claimed sizes and distances, this graphic comes a lot closer to showing what they claim is going on during a Selenelion eclipse, with the real sun and moon below the horizon and the refracted mirage sun and moon above it. First of all, our observer is no longer 1,000 miles tall, but instead a microscopic dot indistinguishable from the surface of the Earth. And the red dotted line accurately portrays him looking horizontally to his horizon, as it is in real life. The sun and the moon are the same size, like we see them in the sky. According to the heliocentric model, this is because the sun is 400 times bigger than the moon, but also 400 times farther away. Regardless, we do see them as the same size in the sky. Also, according to their model, the Earth is 4 times bigger than the moon, and so I've scaled it accordingly. And in their model, a lunar eclipse occurs when the moon passes through the shadow of the Earth. At the distance that the moon passes through it, the shadow is about 2.5 moon diameters wide. At the point of maximum eclipse, the centers of the sun, Earth, and moon are perfectly aligned in what they call a syzygy. And even the heliocentric model experts at NASA acknowledge that, in this alignment, it is geometrically impossible for our observer on the terminator line, the line where day and night meet, to see either the sun or the moon. But since anyone on the terminator line, anywhere on Earth, is able to see both the sun and the eclipsed moon in the sky, and not just under very rare circumstances like we've been told, but during every single lunar eclipse, these NASA experts claim that it's because those people are not seeing the real sun and moon, but refracted mirages of them. The first problem is that it is these same NASA experts who tell us that the sun and moon each refract up only 1 of their own diameters. And as you can see, this 1/2 degree of so-called refraction lift isn't enough to put the alleged mirages of the sun and the eclipsed moon above our observer's horizon so that he can see them both in the sky at the same time. So even if this refraction lift was real, it wouldn't be enough to solve their problem. Secondly, we can see these Selenelions from the very beginning of the eclipse, when the moon is just barely moving into the Earth's shadow. This Selenelion was filmed by Ron Hagberg in Chipley, Florida on January 31st, 2018. As you can see, the moon was just beginning to be eclipsed, as it was setting in front of him and the sun was rising behind him. In the heliocentric model, that means the moon was just beginning to enter the Earth's shadow, which puts the actual moon here and its alleged mirage here. You can verify this on the timeanddate.com website, which simply incorporates the heliocentric model into celestial events that we can see with our own eyes in an effort to explain why we're seeing what we see in the sky. In other words, they show the heliocentric version of what's happening in the sky at any given time, apparently oblivious to the fact that what they show often debunks the very model they promote. Their own illustration of the eclipse Ron Hagberg filmed in Florida shows what he saw, namely that the moon was barely halfway into the Earth's shadow while it and the sun were both above his horizon. And that's a long way from being in the center of the shadow. 52 minutes away to be precise. So that moon was 52 minutes away from even reaching the point where NASA says it would be geometrically impossible for Ron to see it. In fact, even a refracted mirage of Ron's moon wouldn't have been to the point of geometrically impossible. Here's a Selenelion observation from Alamogordo, New Mexico on December 10, 2011. You can verify on timeanddate.com that the sun was rising as the eclipsed moon was setting. In this case, the moon had made it almost all the way into the Earth's shadow by the time it set, but not to the center of the shadow, or the point of geometrically impossible to see it and the sun at the same time. Here's the time and date model of this eclipse from Alamogordo. It shows the sun and the moon both in the sky 39 minutes before the moon even got to the point of geometrically impossible to see it and the sun in the sky at the same time. The heliocentric universe is a mathematical model based on real observations of the movements of lights in the sky and the assumption that these lights are balls of rocks or gas of various sizes and at various distances away from the Earth. And the cool thing about a mathematical model of celestial movements, which we have observed from the Earth for thousands of years as they run the same patterns over and over, is that you can use the model to, quote, predict where these objects will be at any given time and where a person anywhere on Earth would see them at that time. It's like predicting that if the minute hand of your watch is on the 1 now, it will be on the 2 5 minutes from now. So we can take that Alamogordo sky event that I just showed and model what it would have looked like from somewhere else on Earth, say Mexico City. Mexico City is farther east than Alamogordo, which means the sun would have risen sooner there. And that means that both the sun and the eclipsed moon would have been in the sky when the moon was even farther away from the center of the Earth's shadow, or point of geometric impossibility. As you can see from this timeanddate.com illustration, which is based on the heliocentric mathematical model, the sun and eclipsed moon were both above the horizon when the moon had just barely begun to move into the Earth's shadow. The moon was an hour and 37 minutes away from even getting to the place where it's geometrically impossible for our hypothetical observer in Mexico City to see it and the sun both above his horizon at the same time. And 1 diameter of alleged refraction lift isn't going to even come close to placing this sun and this moon above his horizon. Do you understand what I'm saying here? At 6:59 a.m. on December 10th, 2011, anyone in Mexico City would have been able to see the upper edge of the sun rising above their eastern horizon and the upper edge of the eclipsed moon setting below their western horizon. But according to the heliocentric model, the moon was way down here, just barely beginning to enter into the Earth's umbral shadow and become eclipsed by it. Now, if it's geometrically impossible to see the actual moon when it is here, in the center of the umbral shadow, forcing the heliocentric model proponents to invent the idea that the moon refracts up 1 diameter, which, by the way, still doesn't get any part of the moon above the horizon, then how in the heck could it be possible when the moon is way down here? Because even the alleged mirage moon wouldn't be to the point to where they themselves say it would be geometrically impossible to see it above the horizon. So even allowing for this completely unverified miraging claim, every single lunar eclipse refutes the heliocentric model, because during every single lunar eclipse, there are many places on Earth where a person can see the same thing. For example, Ron Hagberg filmed his Selenelion eclipse from Chipley, which is in the Florida Panhandle. But what did that same eclipse look like from Miami, which is further east? According to timeanddate.com, the sun and moon were in the sky at the same time, and here's their model of what that eclipse would have looked like from Miami. So just like the 2011 eclipse in Mexico City, this 2018 Miami eclipse has the moon just barely entering into the Earth's umbral shadow when it sets, which puts the moon about here. So on January 31st, 2018, anyone in Miami could have seen the sun rising above their horizon in the east as the eclipsed moon was setting below their horizon in the west. But according to the heliocentric model, the sun was here not here. And the moon was way down here, an hour and 22 minutes away from even making it to the center of the Earth's shadow, or point of geometrically impossible to see it from Miami. And if it can't be seen from Miami when it's way up here, even with the claimed but never proven 1 diameter of refraction lift, how in the world could it be seen when it's way down here? Like I said, even allowing for their unsubstantiated refraction lift, every single lunar eclipse debunks the heliocentric model. But what I want to make abundantly clear with this video is that the claim of miraging suns, moons, and city skylines is ludicrous to begin with, because this is the size of the actual moon as compared to the Earth in their model, not the moon we see in the sky. So if the real moon is here, we see it as very tiny in the sky like this because of how our eyes work when we have a direct line of sight to a distant object. And when half of the real moon has set, we can stand on the surface of the Earth and see half of this tiny moon setting on a horizon that absolutely must be less than 3 miles away from us according to the ball Earth mathematical model. But the moment the real moon has completely set, there is no longer a direct line of sight to the real moon to make this tiny perspective moon possible. The light from the real moon would continue to reach the Earth as actual size as it had been doing all along, but without a direct line of sight to the source of that light, the tiny perspective moon wouldn't exist. Just like with Chicago, the light from the real moon wouldn't shrink down as it traveled to the Earth and produce a natural tiny moon in the sky that could then somehow refract above our horizon. If the light from the completely set moon could refract above our horizon into a normal-looking mirage moon at all, it would refract as actual size, not tiny perspective size, and we'd see a mirage moon on our horizon 3 miles away from us that would be the same exact size as the actual moon would be if we were literally, physically, only 3 miles away from it. But the light from the moon, the sun, or any object can't possibly refract as a mirage of itself because light doesn't travel as an image of the object it came from in the first place. I'll get into that on the next video. Thanks for watching.